real quick, January 15th and January 16th, I will be in Dallas, Texas at DebateCon. It's hosted by the Modern Day Debates. I think they bumped me to the headline, so I'm going to debate Destiny as the closing debate, which should be interesting. I'm also on another panel. If you're out in the area, you want to come out and see me, get your tickets. It will be linked below. I'm there the second day, so I'm not going to say anything if you get tickets for just the second day because you just want to see me because I'm just that special. But the event should be good overall, so I'm not saying don't get the tickets for the 2 days. You know what I mean. I'm just being a good guy. I'm a swell guy. Come out and see me. Yeah. There's a famous quote that ever since this movie came out that film bros love to use, the people who think Christopher Nolan is the greatest director in the history of directing because they only watch superhero movies. And that, of course, is live long enough to become a villain. And I forgot the full quote because whatever, you know what I mean. And this definitely applies to Ethan Klein. As much as I don't like to use it, as much as I don't like people who constantly use it, he embodies this thing. You either die a hero or live long enough to become a villain, and Ethan has become that villain. He decided that it would be a good idea to go after Joe Rogan based on his interpretation, aka him regurgitating points from the mainstream media that aren't even true about Joe Rogan related to the coronavirus, because what we need is Ethan Klein whining about COVID and telling you about your health, because that's what Ethan does. But here's the thing. We got a sponsor today. It's kind of related to health. It's related to weight. Weight is a topic in the video. We're going to talk about keto with justice, then come back on the other side. Weight management is a near universal struggle in this nation, and if you don't believe me, just take a peek over at the obesity statistics. It ain't pretty. And one of the reasons why people struggle with weight so much is because after you turn age 20, your metabolism can slow down by up to 4% every single decade, meaning by the time you hit 50, your metabolism is 10% slower. This is one of the reasons why I recommend going to Keto with Justice. This amazing keto power works in kind of the same principles of the keto diet. You put a scoop in your coffee in the morning. It's very easy for people, even like me, to follow and do the thing with all the rules. And it can help prolong a fat-burning state known as ketosis. And right now, just for my viewers out there in the audience, just for you personally who's watching this video on your phone, tablet, or whatever, if you go to my custom URL, ketowithjustice.com, you will be able to get a 51% discount on your next order. Get started on your weight loss journey today, ketowithjustice.com. So the way Ethan's unhinged Twitter rant against Joe Rogan, possibly due to the fact that Joe Rogan didn't want to have Ethan Klein on the show in the past, possibly due to the fact that there's a clip out there of Joe Rogan making fun of a woman who's in an outdoor setting, who's fully vaccinated and wearing 2 masks, and how ridiculous she is, and that woman turning out to be Hila Klein, Ethan Klein's wife, starts as follows. Joe Rogan, who lives on elk meat, egg yolk, and human growth hormone with lungs full of tar, thinks he's healthier than everyone. This MFer is such a bitch that when he got COVID, he threw, quote, the kitchen sink after it. If you're so healthy, just write it out like you say a man should. So let's run through a few things that are completely wrong about Ethan Klein's tweet right here, his little rant. And of course, this just shows that this guy is producing the most basic lefty takes that are parroted directly from the mainstream media. Joe Rogan doesn't lecture anybody on anything. He doesn't lecture people on health. He talks about on his show why it's good for people to take vitamins, why it's good for people to exercise, why it's good for people to lose weight, but he does not purport to be a health expert, and he's not lecturing people on their individual choices. This might be confusing for Ethan Klein because everything that he does on his podcast is him lecturing you with the wisdom that he acts like he received from up on high, because he's the only one that can lead the everyday plebs into the future. Secondly, Joe Rogan doesn't smoke cigarettes, so I don't know why he's saying has tar in his lungs. Not sure where he gets that from. A little bit ridiculous. And thirdly, and finally, Ethan Klein is repeating this mainstream media narrative that Joe Rogan says that you shouldn't get treated for COVID, you should just write it out as a man, and somehow Joe Rogan is a bad person for when he got COVID and he was actually sick, for seeking out appropriate medical treatment for that ailment. Where this comes from is a deliberate distortion and misinterpretation of Joe Rogan on his podcast, saying that for young and healthy people, the risk of being seriously ill or dying from COVID is lower than elderly people. He never said it was a no big deal for anybody. He never said it was a non-problem for people in his age demographic, which, by the way, are over 50. In fact, he said the opposite repeatedly. He was just saying that overall, your body condition, how you take care of yourself, does impact to a large degree, and this is backed up by the science, how you respond to COVID. And younger people, on average, respond to COVID a lot better than older people. This got wildly misinterpreted to Joe Rogan saying it's no big deal and somehow saying you shouldn't have any medical treatment for it. And Ethan Klein, who doesn't do his own research, who only has basic low IQ takes on everything from a left-wing perspective, just repeats it in this tweet because he was angry at Joe Rogan for some reason. Dude has caused so much vaccine hesitancy and misinformation, and he doesn't even have the balls to stand by the shit he preaches. Now he's on his show talking about how fat people should just die of COVID. The dude is an effing piece of shit. So yeah, I'm gonna vote no, not even close, not accurate. You just made that up. What's wrong with you, Ethan Klein? Joe Rogan, in no way, shape, or form, first of all, was not standing by what he preaches. He's worried about the vaccine. He didn't get the vaccine. He thinks that healthy people can survive COVID and that there's treatments for COVID. He took those treatments when he got COVID. And he was in no way, shape, or form saying fat people should just die from COVID. What he's saying is that the media is emphasizing vaccines, which may in fact be the best way to prevent you from being seriously ill from COVID, and ignoring treatments. This has come out as a strategy promoted by the media and by the government to get people to get vaccinated more, to downplay the effectiveness of treatments in order to emphasize vaccination. Now, you can say that there's good reason for this, and I could make the argument to people that there's good reason to emphasize vaccines, but without any doubt, the government consistently lies to us and pretends that there's no treatment at all whatsoever for this virus, when we have seen there are effective treatments, and hopefully there will be soon to be discovered more effective treatments for this virus. But again, Ethan just basing his takes on the mainstream media, pretending that Joe Rogan said that nobody should get treatment for COVID, which he never said, pretending that Joe Rogan is somehow hypocritical for pointing out that young people are less impacted, especially young healthy people, by the virus, and that's somehow contradicted by him, over 50, getting treatment when he had a bad case of the virus. Ridiculous in every way, but Ethan goes on. Instead of getting vaccinated, he takes Regeneron, an experimental drug that was developed alongside mRNA vaccines. His logic makes no sense, and then he credits Iro something, which does nothing for COVID. Meanwhile, while Joe is on a big pharma conspiracy against vaccines, someone needs to ask him who makes Ivor something and Regeneron, and all the other stuff he took for COVID. Now look, is Joe Rogan into the conspiracies a bit? Sure, Joe Rogan is friends with Alex Jones. He's been friends with Alex Jones since 1999. However, the idea that because monoclonal antibodies were developed as an experimental treatment alongside mRNA vaccines, therefore they are equal in their safety, or therefore they're related, is ridiculous and scientifically illiterate. Hold on to your hats, folks, because we're gonna learn some intro to science, because I'm not a science person, not a scientist, not a doctor, not a medical professional. I've never studied geology. I don't know anything about rocks or anything like that either. But monoclonal antibodies are essentially lab-created and cloned antibodies meant to fight off a certain infection or virus or whatever. Essentially, you're trying to do what plasma transfusions or antibody transfusions from person to person do from a lab. So it's rooted in that same kind of science. So if you're somebody who's worried about new-ish technology, you have a fear of something being developed like an mRNA vaccine, then I understand why you would be more open to monoclonal antibodies. However, I just want to point out that the antibodies are a way more expensive form of treatment, and due to weird government policies, you may not be eligible for these antibodies if you're seriously ill with COVID and you happen to be white, as exposed by some videos, including Nuance Bro's video on the subject matter. So overall, you can still make the case that you would rather do something preventative than have a treatment when you actually have it. But the idea that because these things were developed, or because we started hearing about these things around the same time, that they are the same in their level of safety or whatever, is a little bit ridiculous. On top of that, as somebody who's actually pro-vaccine but against the mandates, if Ethan Klein was actually smart, if he was actually interested in convincing people to go along with his position, if he was actually interested in refuting points from Joe Rogan, the most obvious way to address concerns about the mRNA vaccines is to point out that the Johnson & Johnson single-shot vaccine is not made with this technology. It is a traditional form of vaccine. Now, a lot of people got scared off by the Johnson & Johnson early on due to the fact that the CDC overreacted to some early reports related to it, but one of the ways you could actually call somebody out for insincere worry about mRNA vaccines is to point out that there is an available option that is not made in this way that people are not taking. But unlike me, who doesn't look down on people just for disagreeing with them, Ethan is not trying to do anything but flex his supposed intellectual superiority over Joe Rogan, even though Ethan is just somebody who's dumb and blindly repeats mainstream media talking points without any hint of hesitation. I mean, again, Ethan works with Cenk's nephew on the Leftovers podcast. That's the new host on the show. Cenk's nephew, somebody who is arguably even less knowledgeable than him, but Ethan thinks Cenk's nephew is an intellectual because Cenk's nephew uses communist buzzwords mixed in with his stupidity. Remember, Cenk's nephew recently stated that it's not copyright infringement if somebody doesn't file a DMCA claim. Something's not a crime unless you get caught or unless you get accused of the crime, according to Cenk's nephew. That's the logic that this guy's operating with. That's the logic of somebody Ethan looks up to, which is why Ethan is in no position to lecture anybody about anything related to intelligence or integrity, and especially not health. And by the way, this is where I'm going to transition into a point that I don't see a lot of people making related to Ethan Klein. And I just want to say, this is not meant as a personal attack on Ethan. It should have been something that he learned a lesson from, but it's indicative of the type of personality that we're dealing with. Now, if you guys don't know, Ethan is actually a father, and Ethan's first kid was actually having problems gaining weight due to the fact that Hila was not producing enough milk naturally for her child. Now, this is not a mark against Ethan's wife. This is something that commonly happens. However, when Ethan would take his child to the hospital every day as a concerned parent, they would just re-emphasize and redouble down on the issue of him having to have more breast milk from the mother.
And the first 3 days were like some of the craziest ever because he was losing weight. He wasn't eating anything, and he was but he was losing a lot of weight.
Yeah,
like because we took him to the doctor.
I mean, we went for follow-ups every day,
but they were concerned.
But it kept losing weight, and then my milk wasn't coming in.
Yeah.
So we both wish that someone told us to just give him formula earlier.
They never even mentioned formula. They warned him against formula. And Ethan, because he was blindly just listening to the experts, he was blindly just taking in all the information that the hospital gives, was not feeding his child based on the fact that he wasn't confident enough to do his own research. Now, of course, formula, there's a lot of stuff about how formula is not as good as breast milk, whatever. That's up to the nerds to decide and work out or whatever. But in reality, whether it's as good as or anything is not really an issue when you can't get enough of that actual source in order to sustain yourself.
Where we didn't even really consider formula as an alternative when our baby was literally starving to death.
He was
screaming
starving.
in our face. Like newborn babies are supposed to sleep 18 hours a day. He slept like 5 hours a day. And the rest he was just
crying.
10 out of 10 agony. And then, you know, it's true that breastfeeding does stuff like it helps with the immune system, but there's this kind of old, long-lasting myth that it like gives you 10 IQ points.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that doesn't really make sense. And so I'm started looking into it, and it's based on some old, kind of not very sound research studies.
The thing is that either way, you can do whatever you can do. If your body's not producing enough milk, it's starving.
Yeah, in your case, there was a biological issue.
What did Ethan Klein think formula was for, if not for this purpose? It should be logical, and it should stand to reason that it was obviously made as a substitute for breast milk. I mean, think about it. When mothers die during the course of childbirth, something that used to be far more common, the only way to save the child was to find an already nursing mother somewhere nearby and get her to agree to also nurse that child. Otherwise, that child would also die. Formula got rid of this problem in our society. This is what it's for. If your mother can't produce, if she died, if anything's wrong with her, or if just naturally she doesn't produce enough to feed your kid, you substitute with formula. You can mix and match. You can do one over the other. You can do whatever, because number one priority should be to feed your kid. But Ethan was so blind, so ignorant, so ill-informed, so deferential to the experts that when they told him time and time again and repeatedly that he just needed to keep going down this path, even though his kid was losing weight, which is obviously dangerous, Ethan continued until somebody broke through and actually gave him information on what to do with his child.
You just got to do what you got to do.
But they kept bringing us to for follow-ups. We were there every day. After delivery, like I was, would like to stay at home and heal and stay with him, but every day we had to go back there. And everyone in the hospital, all they would talk about is breastfeeding. Let me see your nipple. Your nipple looks fine. There's no reason. He's latching. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
Well, okay, he's latching. He's on me for 2 hours and he's still crying.
Yeah.
Now I know that he was starving.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, the whole thing was so frustrating.
wish that I
was
knew
upset.
earlier.
It was really upsetting that after all that time, they had to wait till like he was actually lost a concerning amount of weight.
Well, when they actually started to get worried was when he didn't pee.
Oh yeah, he didn't
Right.
pee for like 2 fucking days.
And we were there every day. They knew that he wasn't peeing.
Did we talk about how they were gonna give him a catheter? We did.
Yeah, you did when I wasn't here,
Yeah.
I think.
And it's like, hello, of course he's not peeing. He's not fucking drinking anything. I don't know. It's annoying.
And by the way, this knowledge isn't something that's difficult to come by. This knowledge isn't something that should be intuitive. As I said, what do you think the purpose of formula is, if not to supplement or replace the nutrition required for an infant? But you can also find it in fiction. Go read any of the Game of Thrones books, this popular series that talks about and has a lot of mothers that die early in childbirth, and realize that you need to find a substitute when the mother can't provide in order to overcome these difficulties. I mean, again, formula is used when the mother is HIV positive to prevent transmission, which can happen through the milk to the child. It's used for all these different purposes. It is only the naturalists, the cult around places like LA and in the nation, the cult that even Ethan can identify now after having dealt with it with his own child, that puts this pressure on parents to produce and never use formula as an alternative. You would think after everybody in the hospital told you the exact wrong advice, put your child in danger, convinced you to the point where you are not doing the basic duty of feeding your own child, the number one priority, you would think, okay, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to be such a hard ass about listening to people, especially when the advice doesn't ring true. Because when I listen to people against my better judgment, when me and my wife didn't do our own research, when we did not let our own thinking minds overcome what we were being told repeatedly, it almost led to serious negative consequences for our child. Look, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think pharmaceutical companies are smarter than government regulators. If government regulators knew more about prescription drugs and how to develop this stuff than people at pharmaceutical companies, then they would be working at those pharmaceutical companies. So a lot of the hesitancy around the vaccine is something that's never really interested me. But I don't care if you guys get it or not. If I believe that it works, if I believe that it confers some level of protection on the people who use it, then I'm not worried about the people who don't use it. And because the virus isn't some plague that's killing 30% of those who are infected by it, like smallpox is, I don't believe that mandating it is something that is ethical nor moral to do. You should take your health and illnesses and the pandemic seriously. However, you should not allow yourself to devolve into hysteria. Look at the numbers, look at the statistics, look at your chances of dying, whether you're vaccinated versus unvaccinated, and you'll realize that this is not something that poses a significant risk to the majority of people in the population. There are people who are vulnerable. There are people who need treatments. There are people who need to be looked out for, and there are people who think that they're perfectly healthy that have these underlying conditions that they need to get checked out for. This is one of the reasons why I'm against lockdowns. I want people to be able to go to the doctor's office, go to their appointments for other things, because they might discover that they are a person who uniquely requires the vaccine or uniquely requires extra preventative measures, but we're ignoring all of that. We're ignoring cancer screenings because we're so afraid. We prioritize COVID over all other things. And I truly believe that in a few years, when the nerds do the studies, when they crack the books, when they look over the data, it's going to turn out that delayed cancer screenings, suicide, deaths of despair, all these other problems associated with the lockdowns meant to combat COVID were actually more severe and caused worse consequences in our nation than if we would have just lived our lives as normal, taking the precautions that we personally felt were valid. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, you can show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. You can follow me on all my social medias. You can support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about Ethan going after Joe Rogan. Till next time.